Hey, Dan, I'm excited to have you on the podcast today. With your experience and all the books that you've published, I'm just thrilled to be able to talk to you about your experience with writing, and learn any tips and tricks you might have for other people who are beginning their author stages. Before we dive into it, though, I'd love to ask where or how long have you been writing and publishing?
Well, I've been writing essentially for my whole life. I started
Okay,
when I was 10 years old. And let me just back up a second by say I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you this afternoon and
sure.
and you anyone that's listening. So I've been writing my whole life, but seriously, I gathered a lot of momentum, I guess, about 15 years ago.
Mhm.
Um, so dawdling around with little stories here and there my whole life, and doing mostly a lot of writing for business, some in the corporate world, um, and like most writers, struggling to complete a story, right?
Mm,
Um, so that's something we can talk about if you wish. Um, uh, but the last 10 or 15 years, I really gathered a lot of momentum. I started to trust myself a little bit more, and realizing that just pushing through to the end was so important, right? In general, I think we all have these great ideas for a book.
mhm,
So that's what it starts out, right? You have this idea, you develop it in your head a bit like that, and then you're so excited to get it to paper. So
mm,
bingo, you start writing and you go, this is the best story in creation. This is unbelievable. And then somewhere around the soggy middle, it's termed, I believe. So let's say after 30,000 or 20,000 words, all of a sudden you start going, mm, the doubts start creeping in, and you
mhm,
go, oh boy, this story is terrible. I'm never going to be able to finish it. And most people take it at that point and ditch it. They stick it in desk drawer, or they wipe the file away, and they feel bad for a while. They feel relieved, because there is relief, because it's
mhm.
very difficult. There's a bit of a relief. And then whatever it may be, depends on another idea germinating, you come up with another idea and you go, this is the one. And essentially the same story plays out. And I think if you talk to most successful authors, and I'm talking about the highly successful folks, they all encounter the same thing. It's difficult to slog through the middle when you have all of these threads going on, and you trying to figure out how I can resolve it. I can't resolve this. This is hard. And then you sit there and go, I got right. You come up with plot issues, right? So there's how am I going to resolve this issue? And
Mm,
it's called writer's block. And I don't really believe in that. I don't believe in that block thing. There are ways to, in my opinion anyway, that I use. I'm not saying it works for everyone, but I slog through, I push through. If I come up with a plot problem, and I do invariably several times in everything I've ever written, if I can't figure out how this makes a believable resolution of the issue, or maybe how do I introduce a character that I need to come in, I put it aside. I put
mm,
that part of the book aside, and I write something else that needs to get written. There's another scene that I know I could write, and you let that thing kind of percolate. And maybe when you're exercising, going for a walk, whatever folks do, yoga, whatever they may do, you kind of let that thing percolate a little bit. And I have a weird thing that I do, and every morning I wake up, I lay in bed, and I kind of put that problem in my head, but I don't actively try to solve it. And
mm.
as ideas float into my head, I actually push them out. And many, many times, after a while, it may take 2 or 3 days, all of a sudden I go, ooh, there it is. This is
Mm.
the way I can do it. And I work it through that way. That was a long-winded answer.
No, I mean, there's a lot to unpack in there, but I think it was a very well-rounded answer because the root of this writer's block that
Yeah,
a lot of people like to, I also don't necessarily agree with that
yeah,
existing. I think,
yeah.
honestly, probably a lot of the times it's inhibition more than
Yeah.
anything that's stopping us, apprehension,
Yeah.
nervousness that we won't properly solve it for our readers. But I like that you said, put it aside and don't try to actively solve that problem. Because like you, I have just kind of come across the answer to a plot issue or a plot hole or possibly a character issue just out of the blue when I'm just thinking about it throughout the day. Are there specific activities where you intentionally do them for thinking about your books, like whether they be physical activities or showering, or is there something you do specifically to kind of open up your creative mind to solve those problems passively?
Well, first of all, you know, 7 days a week, I do something physical. Either it's a, several mile walk, or 2 days a week going in a gym, doing weight training, if you will.
Mm,
That I think helps. But during those activities, and I've been debating this recently, is because I listen to podcasts or possibly music,
mm,
so you're getting more information. And sometimes if you're listening to a podcast about writing, just for argument's sake, or maybe listen to an Audible book, um, uh, you hear something, you go like, wow, okay, how can I apply this? And what kind of opening would it do?
mm.
Make, if you will. The other thing that I do is I'm a musician. I play the saxophone,
Oh,
and I
cool.
play essentially every day. I practice that every day, and I find in my schedule, if you will, I start to write, and then you kind of get drained, right? You do get drained. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I need to play my horn, So I retreat into my room and play my horn for an hour or so, practice whatever I'm working on. And I kind of feel that frees up, even though it's a creative endeavor as well. It's a different kind of creativity, I think. And it kind of, for me anyway, it opens up some of my creativity, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that break, while still in a creative vein, kind of gives me an area of respite, if you will, and that could possibly help. The other thing I do too, when I'm actually in the middle of another book, and I have an issue about one of these a plot issue, and I said, how am I going to resolve it? I have the easy way out. I
Mm.
know, the easy way to do it. And there were two other options that I've come up with. And I actually, right before we started this, I said, yeah, that third one is really the one that would be like a shift shaker type of a thing. It would really shake up the earth, but I think there's some problems if I went that way. But I've learned to sometimes do it of say, what's the craziest thing that can happen,
Mm.
right? What's the unexpected thing that can happen here? And then would that work? And
Mm-hmm.
it's a little scary sometimes because it usually sends you off in another direction, because I'm not a
Yeah.
big plotter, right?
Okay.
I don't know about yourself,
I'm
but
not.
yeah, right.
I'm not a father.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things about writing as I originally started out writing, I was never a plotter anyway. I tried it. I took a class with oh my gosh, the British writer, he's phenomenal. Pillars of the Earth, Ken Follett.
Oh,
And
wow.
so he's a massive plotter. I mean, he in this class, he said that, his outlines are 40 pages long. And
My
he said,
word.
yeah. And he goes, of course, the book is easy to write after that. And I said, wow, this is what I got to do. And the book becomes easy. I
Mm.
mean, writing a plot, a 40-page outline, excuse me, was the worst thing that I ever tried to do in my life. It was terrible. It was terrible. I couldn't do it. So I make, I have my main idea, and then I usually write, let's say 10 or 15 kind of scenes. I don't write them, but I write a sentence or so for 10 or 15 scenes, knowing where it's going to get me. And then as I go along, I'm usually pushing those scenes further out, or eliminating them, or changing them.
Mm.
But at this stage, again, after having quote unquote discovery written, or as they say, seat of your pants, a
Mm.
pantster,
Mm-hmm.
where I would end up with, 100,000 words, and it would be a kind of a mess, and it would take me so much work to make it a book. Now my style or my procedure is pretty clean. So after a first draft, I don't really have a tremendous amount of work to do any longer. So I've refined my process by keeping tabs, if you will, of the running threads that need to be dealt with. So that when it goes to the editor, they go like, "What? You never resolved this. You didn't." That's how it was for me early on. Like, you didn't resolve A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now I kind of keep somewhat decent track of that as I go along. And then what I've gotten into the habit of now is that after I've written, let's call it 20 or 25,000 words, I generally go back to the beginning and go through the book, because maybe there's things that need to be seeded, if you will, or changed. Or maybe there's a character voice that I said, this is the way this character is going to be. And I go, that doesn't work. It's just, I wanted him to be that way, but, modeling after someone, or some experience that you had, but it doesn't feel true after, 30,000 words or something like that. So you go back in and have to really do a little massage in there. So that's how I do the way I write. I know a lot of folks write, they look at what they written yesterday and then continue on to keep that stream going, right? They get back into their story that way. They do some editing and go along. I'm so anxious to write. I hate to waste time on, I want to move on. I want to move the story on.
Absolutely. So. Yep. We have very similar writing processes, although I think you have possibly even a little more elements of plotting than me. I don't even write sentence long chapter descriptions. I just kind of let it come. But you highlighted a couple things that I think is really key for slogging forward, moving forward when you hit these moments of inhibition or quote unquote writer's block. You mentioned, playing your instrument is something that kind of opens up your creativity. So if you've established the connections in your mind and this kind of habit around writing and the creative process, which I think a lot of people downplay too much. When you're an author, even if you can't have a regularly scheduled time for writing, possibly even like mini routines that get you into the creative mindset can only help you when you hit those moments, right? And you're like, if I follow these steps, then you reach a point where your creativity kind of flourishes and it can help you in the process.
It's an excellent point. I realized that it would help me when I played, or it would just relieve my anxiety about not playing. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. Maybe it was an excuse, get away from doing it. It's like a relief. Oh, I'm at this point, like, I'm getting tired, whatever it is, mentally tired. And then I go over here and I go, oh, I'm jumping in the pool and everything's cool. And I come back out, you feel refreshed. Yeah. But I like the way you set that up in terms of almost like Pavlov's dog thing. You do ABC. And you're in this space. This guy wrote a book called Effortless Mastery. Kenny Werner, he's a really phenomenal jazz pianist. And I read the book, and it's been years and years and years. But the way he sets it up is that how to get into the quote unquote flow state by doing these 5 things that get you there, so to speak. And I'm just paraphrasing this whole, but I like the connection that you just made. I think anything that's helpful, right? Even if you're just fooling yourself, essentially.
Kind of, almost a placebo effect, honestly. Yeah. It's amazing what the human mind can react to. It may seem silly or small, but if it works, it works, right?
God, man, hang on to it. The funny thing is, I'm a big habit guy. I'm definitely big in the habit thing. But one thing that I kind of that's contrary to that is that I could write anywhere. I know where I'm most productive. I know when I live in Southwest Florida, so the weather's always great. I sit out in my lanai generally, and I really can crank it out. But I could also, I sit at my kitchen table quite a bit. When I'm waiting to get on the call with you, I'm doing something. If I'm on an airplane, if I'm got to bring my car to be serviced or something, and I have an hour sitting there, I'm bringing my laptop. I got to make use of the time. Time is the one non-refundable thing that we have in our lives. We got to choose to use it wisely. One of the points that I wanted to make in this getting through the slog, if you will, when the words are really difficult, right? I force myself basically to force the words out, right? And
Mm.
it sounds terrible. It sounds so uncreative. Um, and again, I'm not saying it's so easy to force it out. I mean, I struggle with this as well, but I do it. I don't allow myself to get up and say, I can't do this right now. I'll come back tomorrow. I don't really allow myself to do that. So one of the interesting things about this approach about quote unquote forcing, because it really sounds terrible to force something. I realized after, doing it for a bit, this is a couple of years ago, that I read back, when I'm forcing it out, it feels like it's garbage,
Hmm.
feels like the terrible writing. What was interesting is going back and reading what I wrote that was so-called uh, forced versus flow state, whatever that word is.
Hmm.
Um, I couldn't determine what was written in either state. It was still the same quality. I don't want to say it was great, but it was still the same quality. And that
Hmm.
was like a big revelation and going like, oh my gosh. So I really got to force it out when I have to force it out. It's not that it's going to be garbage. It may need some massaging like anything else you wrote. Sometimes when information is coming through you and you're feeling like, oh, I write the scene, you're writing so fast and you're not like editing along the way, that sometimes that stuff needs to get more editing done when you read through it. It sounds plausible. Again, I don't know because I don't keep track of what was written in, again, forced versus flowing, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It absolutely makes sense. It's kind of interesting. I heard a recent live interview between um with Brandon Sanderson. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's a pretty
Yeah, sure,
famous
of
fantasy
course.
author.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And one of the points that he made, it was the very point that you just made, was
Mm,
that he likened it to someone who has a full-time job, or is a stay-at-home mom, or has these responsibilities that no matter how much you feel like it, you can't just not do it.
yeah,
Right. He's like, if you treat writing the same way, we all have our off days. We do. But when you
yeah.
get to your writing session, you're just not feeling it. You're not feeling into it. You can't just say, I'm not going to do it. If you treat it like this is something you just have to do, you just do it. You force it out. You push through it, treat it like that non-negotiable responsibility. And then you find that either one of two things will happen. You find that as you get started, you push through that and you do get into it, or you just force it out for that session and then the next day you're back into it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think you always have the editing phase, and whether or
Yeah,
not it is discernible between the forced sessions versus the flowing sessions, you
yeah,
you do have the option of editing it. And once you've established that, helps establish that habit. But I agree, I have forced a number of sessions worth of words and also
yeah.
was not able to see the line between the two types of writing, because my brain is still working the same, even though it doesn't feel like it's flowing quickly in the moment.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really important thing for all writers to understand,
Mm.
especially aspiring writers or beginning writers, that's perfectly fine to have to force it out. And the other thing is, which is a big thing, and it was kind of, I forget who said it, and actually it was pretty crass the way he, said that,
Mm.
I'm an aspiring, to responding to someone about aspiring writers, basically he said, that's nonsense. You're not a writer. You're a writer if you write. If you don't write, you're not a writer. If you want to be a writer, I want to be an astronaut. I can't call myself I'm an aspiring astronaut. I can't say I'm an astronaut. I mean, it was a little too hard, if you will, of a put down. But there is a lot of truth to that. If you want to write and express yourself, you really need to make a routine of it.
Hmm.
Now, I understand that there are many, many people that want to write and maybe do write a little bit. I don't have the amount of time. I do this full time. Don't have the time to do that and have, young children, whatever responsibilities, their caretakers. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Everyone, there's all kinds of things that come into your life, all kinds of responsibilities that we have. But you alluded to before about the job. If you had a job, whatever that may be, a 9 to 5 job, you have the 8 hours. You have to do that.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just weasel out of it, hey, my kid, is this, or, he's got a soccer game or whatever goes on. So you have to set that side aside. So I say usually, and I don't do this actively anymore because it's really so habitual to me that I know I'm going to write. So I don't have to worry about it. But many times, first thing in the morning, if I'm was maybe walking a dog or doing something like that, I used to say, think about think about my day and say, okay, I got ABC things going on. So where's my time slot? Can I grab 10 to 12 here and then maybe 3 to 5 over here, or 6 to 8? I'm usually don't write late. And figure out what that day's challenges in terms of demands on your time, whether it be family obligations or other work obligations, and then say, hey, I'm going to write this particular, and then make sure you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you do it. Don't let yourself off the hook. And then you'll be surprised if you don't write. I'm a guy that basically writes every day. And if I don't, I feel like queasy. I mean, because I feel like I let myself down. It's crazy. But that's the habit that, I got to be able to do. I got to be able to write every day, and I got to be able to play my horn every day. Those are the things that kind of keep me. And believe me, there's a lot of challenges in my life too, with demands and family, etc. But I think that's important for many people who want to write or have begun to write, because the words pile up, man. They pile up if you do it consistently.
They definitely do. But yeah, I like exactly what you said. Joanna Penn, who's over the Creative Penn podcast,
sure.
I listen to hers regularly. She always talks about showing up for yourself and showing up for your writing sessions, wherever they are, whether you schedule them or whether you need to do it every day and you don't have prepared times for it. Just show up and be there, even if you don't feel like it. That's the first step. And I think a lot of people, it's easy to fall into the routine of letting excuses take over. Excuse
100%.
for X, and we all have lots going on. I don't think there's any person who doesn't have at least something on their mind, a lot of things plaguing their thoughts, but you show up for yourself and you show up for the writing, and that's when it starts to happen. So,
and I, the novel, if that's what you're writing, a novel is a big project, man. It's whatever it may be. Let's say 80,000 words, and in the fantasy genre, I know these things are bigger than that. Could be 120, 1,000, or something like that. Whatever that number is. So, in my opinion, I love to have goals for myself. So I try to set a daily goal, and many times I don't meet it. Most times I do. So write that goal down, whatever it is. If it's 200 words, or it's going to be a scene, or a page, or a chapter, whatever that is, write it down. Put that sticky where you can see it, especially when you wake up in the morning, man. Put it on your nightstand when you wake up, next to your glass of water, or whatever the heck it is, or your cup of coffee, and remind yourself that last night I promised myself I was going to write 1,000 words today, or 200 words. However it is that you break it up. Some people like to do scenes, I got to write the scene today, or this chapter, whatever it may be. But if you break that down, and it's a feeling of accomplishment that also fuels your energy level to get back at it. Yesterday I said I was in a 200. Maybe I'll try 250 today. Yeah. Whatever it is. And as word counts, even at, again, I keep on using 200 words because that's pretty simple to write. 200 words. If you did it, even you took 65 days off, you took 20% of the year off, you would have 60,000 words, which is a novel in many genres. There you go, in a year. So, when people say to me, because I sometimes I had written 3 books a year, but generally I'm like a two now. I'm like about 2. If people always ask me, everybody, I'm sure they ask you, how long does it take you to write a book? How long does it take? How long does it take? But if you break it down, and you said, if I was able to write, 1,000 words a day, and again, sometimes I write more, many times I write less, depending upon what else is going on, in terms of trying to market or, promoting your books, etc. At 1,000 words a day, if you did that for not quite 3 months, or you did it for 3 months, you'd have 90,000. Trim it down to wherever it's going to be, 75,000 words in my genre, a mystery, 75,000. So that's 3 months. Now it's going to take some editing. I got to go over the draft and blah, 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 blah. You got you got a book, man. You could do 2 or 3 a year like that, And again, I know it's not easy for somebody starting out to put that kind of volume together, but you do get momentum. One of the other things that I think is critical, and it goes to this slogging thing, and is to trust yourself.
Mm.
When you get to these points in the book, either A, where it's like, oh my God, this is a mess, or I can't finish it, or this is a big problem, that I got to resolve this problem. And I like to move on to other things, to put that aside for a second, as we talked about earlier. You're able to do that if you trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'll fix that, man. I know I'm going to fix it. I can't solve it today. Let me put that over here. Let me continue on. And maybe something as you're writing, also sometimes you go, oh, bingo. Is that your subconscious mind? I don't know. Maybe watching a television show, you see something and you go like, oh, geez, that's not my situation, but I like the way they flip that, and can I pull from that somehow? It feeds your conscious, or your subconscious rather, and these things come things, but they'll only do that if you can trust yourself. Look at the solution and trust yourself to work it through, and take your time and see if it's legitimate or not, and of course, if you're really worried about things like that, you can bring it to, beta readers, or have somebody, do it at that point. I don't use that stuff any longer. I don't like anybody to read what I've written until it's 100% cleaned out, edited, and proofread. I'm kind of quirky like that. So it's probably because I got my butt kicked so many times by editors.
Well, that is definitely not the most enjoyable process, but it's necessary. Now, and I think the thing is, you've written so many books that and you've trusted yourself to be able to cover those major plot kind of flow character issues. And, if you get to that point, you don't necessarily need those resources. But, some people prefer beta readers, some people prefer alpha readers. I don't use all of them. It depends on the story and what I'm writing. But
of course, no, I don't.
Yeah, it comes down to, I agree that the trusting yourself makes a huge difference in the success you find in the day-to-day writing and breaking it down. When you mentioned the 200 words over a 65-day period, kind of what that sums up to, a lot of people don't recognize that, that's more than I thought. There's this expectation to do so much within a small period of time, but what's the rush when you can break it down? Fit it into whatever lifestyle you have and still come out with a novel in the end. I think it kind of comes from this race mindset. It's always a race, trying to get there before everybody else. But when you get into that mindset, rather than breaking it down and having those goals, there comes the inhibitions, right? And it's hard to trust yourself if you're constantly missing these, $6,000 word count goals every day. Then you're kind of losing trust in yourself, when instead you can break it down to something smaller and more manageable.
Yes, I one of the, another interesting thing is, because I read sometimes, as we all do, in all these, what other authors, you hear these guys, guy writes 10,000 in a day. I can't even fathom that, frankly.
Right.
5,000 is like, just, oh my God, that's incredible. And there are these people that do these sprints. And then there are other folks who write 2,000 words and then come back, next Saturday, whatever it is. I think it's, if you can, you went.
There you go. Continue.
I think that if you're able to do it, the consistency thing also, it gives you another advantage. If you're only writing at 200 words or 300, whatever that number is, anything over anything under 1,000, is anything you write is important. It's progress. I think that consistency keeps you in the story. I've had situations where I've written 2 books at the same time, and I was trying to figure out how to do that. I would never do it again, but and I would say, okay, I'm going to do this for 2 weeks, then I'm going to come back to this one for 2 weeks. So I wanted to get into a flow, and all I found out is that what happened in that other book, I was not connected to the story as well as I should have been. And I find that happens to me sometimes. If we go, well, it was all pre-COVID anyway, but we used to travel to Europe every year, and we'd spend, let's say 3 weeks there. I always had my laptop with me, and I always promised to write. I'd write on the plane like crazy.
Mm.
But here and there, I would try to sneak in 200 words, 300 words. Very rare that I could write 1,000. Because spending time with family was much more important. But I found that if I wasn't connected to the story, so then when I was ready to go back and write regularly on it, I almost had to go back to the beginning and try to like fill in the gaps in my own memory about it, and that's the other danger, when I write, and you write so many books, especially in the same series, and one of my series is 15 books plus a prequel, and I'm writing the 16th. People
Wow.
ask me, like, they give me a title, and I go, I don't even know what the heck happened in that book. So trying to keep all these stories straight, right, is a challenge. So stay connected to your story somehow. If you don't have the ability to write every day, find a way, even just to read that. If you're commuting, read what you wrote. Just stay connected to it, because it'll make writing the next 200 words easier.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think that's something that I kind of learned subconsciously as I was writing my story. So I've written a trilogy in there. Each book is quite lengthy, but maintaining the thought of that story throughout my daily life, as I'm out taking care of the animals that we have, as I'm, washing dishes or cleaning up or whatever, thinking about kind of what I've written and the characters in the world that I'm creating definitely keeps you connected. And then that does two things. Not only does it help you stay connected to the story and write more effectively, but it makes it so much easier to get into the writing session. Right. If you've lost touch with the world and the reality of the story, you have to capture that again before you can get into your next session. And there's, when you're switching activities constantly, it just makes it smoother to get into, the 200 words, say, that you're writing that day. You can do it much more quickly rather than it takes an hour, because 30 minutes of it was trying to reconnect with the story.
Yeah, spot on. 1,000%, especially in the genre that you're writing, and world building. You create the world. I mean, this is, at least I'm I'm in the regular world here, so I don't have to reach that deep or stay that connected to everything as you do. And then the story itself. So it's like two different things. You got the story, and then you have the world. I know they're related, but they're still separate, made up things that you have to keep track of.
Yep.
And if you step away for too long, the other thing that's kind of, I've just begun realizing this, that and I've only stopped doing this probably maybe a year and a half or 2 years, is where I don't think about the story 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely value in that. There's no question about it. But maybe it's trust, maybe it's, I try to push it out. I push it out. I really actively push it out, but I still feel that there's something going on. It's kind of weird. There's no magic, folks. We all got, God or our creator gave us the same kind of brain. Maybe it functions a little bit differently, individual, but we all have that subconscious. We all have these things working. And we probably don't realize that. Like, this whole subconscious thing was kind of like a revelation to me about how to solve problems, which probably when you tell the average person, or non-writer, I should say, or non-creative, they may look at you with kind of like a, rolled eye type of thing, but it's valid. And they have the same ability to use that, to draw upon that resource that is in all of us.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And once you recognize that, I think it kind of unlocks the potential that you have for yourself and for your writing. But we could talk probably for hours. I mean, there's so much to unpack with this, but unfortunately we are running out of time. So before we end, I would love to ask, where can people find more information about you and your books if they want to take a look at what you've done?
Well, the simplest way is to my website, and then there's all links to, Facebook, and just recently rejoined Twitter. And that's the whole, I mean, the social media thing is another whole thing to be talked about. My website is danpetrosini.com. So it's DanPetrosini.com.
Perfect. Yeah. And we'll make sure that's in the show notes.
Oh,
well, thanks
great.
so much for your time, Dan. I appreciate it.
Dan, I appreciate the opportunity. It's been great to chat with you, and we're very, very like-minded. And I learned a few things from you today.
It's great to learn from each other.
Yes, exactly.